Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I got to say, boy, that sounds good, Mr. Chairman.
That isn't as good as it sounds to me, Senator. Thank you.
Well, congratulations, and I'm looking forward to the next 2 years working together.
Thank you.
And to Senator Rubio, let me say congratulations to you as well. We're going to miss you on this committee. We're going to miss you in the Senate, but you're going to do an extraordinary job at Foggy Bottom. And I will say, if they capture you and tie you up in the basement, we will send a team to pull you out. You know, as I look back over the last 4 years of the Biden-Harris administration, there are a lot of policies that have done a lot of damage. Domestic policies, economic policies, but I think all of those pale compared to the damage that has been done to national security and foreign policy over the last 4 years. Over the last 4 years, this administration has systematically undermined and abandoned our allies, and it has systematically shown weakness and appeasement to our enemies. And the consequence has been disastrous. We've gone from 4 years ago, peace and prosperity, to today a situation with wars across the globe and every enemy of America stronger than they were when this administration came into office. I am confident the incoming administration is going to change that direction. I am confident that President Trump in the White House and you as Secretary of State are going to shift us back to where we should be, which is standing by our friends and allies and standing up to our enemies. Do you agree with that assessment? Is that what you intend to do as Secretary of State?
Well, let me say first, the foreign policy of the United States will be set by the President, and my job is to advise on it and ultimately to execute. I think the President has been abundantly clear, and that is his policy is going to be driven about making America safer, stronger, and more prosperous. As I said in my opening statement, everything the State Department does, every policy, every program, every dollar it spends, every initiative it takes has to answer three questions. Does it make us safer? Does it make us stronger? Or does it make us more prosperous? And if it doesn't, if the answer is not yes to one of those three, you're going to have a hard time moving that forward, because that's the priority that the President, and that's the priority that, by the way, voters gave this President when they elected him. You point to a number of things that I think are critically important, and let me, I'll phrase it a different way, but I think we're saying the same thing. We have lost deterrence in multiple theaters around the world. So as an example, and I use this as a small-scale example, but it's really an important one. I think the year was 2019, the Wagner Group tried to get cute and came after some of Americans operating in Syria. And fire from the sky rained down on them. And that group was pushed back pretty hard. That's deterrence. They threatened us, and they knew what the response would be. I recall the consternation here and in other places when Soleimani met his demise. But I can tell you it impacted Iranian behavior for a substantial period of time. No matter how tough they talked, it impacted their behavior. I think it's important to reestablish deterrence. And to the extent that that's been lost for a variety of reasons, the lack of deterrence is an invitation to war. The lack of deterrence is an invitation to hostility. It prevents the very thing that we hope to achieve, which is peace and stability in the world. And I do think we've lost deterrence. And I think in some ways it contributed to what happened in Ukraine. An item I know is very close to you and you've worked very on, and we talked earlier today about, is energy dependence. I recall President Trump at both a NATO summit and at the United Nations, and I recall the United Nations one in particular, President Trump said Germany is entirely going to be left dependent on China, on Russia for its energy. And they laughed at him. There were diplomats in the hall that were snickering. That's exactly what happened. It is one of the reasons why Putin believed he could invade Europe, is because Europe would not push back because they depended on him so much for energy. Now, Europe is to be congratulated. They have moved very swiftly, particularly the Germans, to diversify their energy resources. But one could argue that we may never have had that invasion had that dependence not existed, because maybe who would have thought the European response would have been more forceful than he anticipated. So I do think reestablishing deterrence and strength is important, because it prevents war and it gives us leverage in diplomacy, where we hope to solve 99.9% of the global disagreements we hope to solve through diplomacy, not through armed conflict.
I think that's very well said.